For thousands of years, elders and knowledge keepers have used stories to educate future generations. Stories and words can help heal our hearts and make Mother Earth a better place for all people. This is Healing Hearts.
Hello everyone, I'm Tracy Koga and welcome to Healing Hearts. We are all watching the biggest stage for sport, and that is the Olympics in Tokyo, Japan. But if you take a closer look, where are all the Indigenous and athletes of color representing Canada? Tonight, we discuss anti-racism in sport, but more importantly, how do we create a level playing field for all athletes? Healing Hearts starts now. Hello, and once again, welcome to Healing Hearts. Let's open the doors to all of our distinguished guests tonight. I am so happy. It's a brand new show. We did a little bit of a summer little break, and here we are, the Olympics, the biggest stage for all sport. But tonight, we want to talk about anti-racism in sport, and also, more importantly, how do we raise the bar and create an inclusive way to include all athletes of all race, of all color, and of all abilities. So I am so happy. I have, first of all, I have Daria Hokera Palmer, who has a great organization. Actually, it is called Anti-Racism in Sport through Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. I have the very distinguished Professor Tina Chen on board from the University of Manitoba. Of course, your specialty is history, but you are going to bring to the table a lot more about this subject. And I've always wanted to meet this woman, Leisha Strawn from the U of M, also Professor, Associate Dean, Kinesiology and Recreational Management. And again, Leisha, you're going to tell us a lot more about your own lived experience and what you can bring to the table. And definitely last but not least, very important, Chris Prince. Now, formerly, Clayton said that you were a professional lacrosse player, but we're going to hear more about you as a dad with a son playing football, and your thoughts and feelings and everything like that that you can bring to the table, and certainly representing to your communities, with First Assembly too as well. And thoughts and prayers with your communities through all of these forest fires and wildfires and being displaced, and we're sending all of our love. Okay, so actually I'm going to go with Daria because you're part of IPW, which, again, they're a huge, I guess, partnership, or, we have a great partnership with them. And we heard about this organization that you're the campaign coordinator and manager for. So, Daria, let's talk about right now the Anti-Racism in Sport campaign that you're heading.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I'm the campaign project manager for the Anti-Racism in Sport campaign with Immigration Partnership Winnipeg, funded by the Canadian Heritage. So it's been a really interesting year, this full year. We started planning for this campaign back in November after we received notice that we would get this grant, and we launched officially in April of 2021, and it's going to be running for an entire year all the way to March 2022. And for me, this is a fantastic campaign, mainly also because I'm an athlete, a coach, and a referee. And so it really sort of encompassed a lot of the beliefs that I had growing up as an athlete, and then really moving forwards into sort of that active for life perspective of how we look into the long-term athlete development model. And so Anti-Racism in Sport is a really great campaign that we're running. And it's an intersectional and a multifaceted approach in how we're working with this campaign. And we have several different activities that we're running. So we have a research campaign with the University of Manitoba, collecting data and lived experiences of racism and discrimination in sport, the root causes of racism and discrimination, and then existing in anti-racism initiatives and resources that can help with our campaign. We're also running school presentations with middle school students. So we have a professional athlete and a prominent community member, athlete or coach, who's partnering together to deliver these presentations. And they're really great. We've already done a few in June, and then we'll be running through them through the rest of the year. We're going to be starting to do training for sports stakeholders. So this is going to be for players, for parents, for coaches, referees, sport administrators, and board members on their different roles in how to be an anti-racist with an organization or as an individual, or what type of actions can they take. We also have a public awareness campaign, which is a lot of where we're going to be promoting a lot of our materials on social media mainly, but also through public venues as we've done throughout the past with CBC and Winnipeg Free Press. And then we also have an accord that we're going to be developing that's going to be launching in the fall, very similar in concept to the Indigenous Accord, whereby organizations can sign on to move forward the point and how are they going to be an anti-racist organization, what actions are they going to take, what steps they're going to take to move themselves forward, and then also have that acknowledgement piece of what's been happening and then how to reconcile with moving forward into being an anti-racist organization. So those are the activities that we've been running, and we're really excited to share that information with you.
So I'm curious, Daria, like what has been sort of the feedback, or what have been some of the questions that have been asked going through all of these programs?
Sure. So when we first launched, we had really great reception. I think we had probably about 1,500 people watch our launch event, which was fantastic. We couldn't have asked for something better, which is really great. The biggest question that we did have were from individuals, and they were saying, what can I do? How can I contribute to this campaign, or how can I be a part of it? And we're really hoping that through the activities that we're having something for everyone within sport, so that if they're in school, we have the school presentations. And if you have a student, or if you're a teacher or connected to a school, we would really like you to sign up on our website to have a school presentation, and it's completely free. Or if you'd like to learn more about different types of training, we're going to be offering that training in the fall. So it'll be a really great opportunity for everyone to get involved, to have knowledge sharing, and then to also learn a lot more about the great initiatives that are already happening in the city. I mean, it's not about rebuilding the wheel here. There's a lot of really great activities. There's the ACM, the Aboriginal coaching modules, that happen through Manitoba Aboriginal Sport and Recreation Council. And so we really want to highlight those pieces, and how it's not just about being an anti-racist, but it's also about how do you learn, how do you educate yourselves, and then how do you use that knowledge within your role in sport.
And now you mentioned too that you were an athlete as well as a coach. What has been sort of your lived experience, Daria, as an athlete with racism?
Well, I went through, I guess, sort of different pieces with sport as an athlete. I started sports when I was very young. I came from a family of newcomers. So my father's from Chile and my mother's from Germany. So I was really first generation when I was born in Canada. And so my father had no idea that girls could even play sports. But as soon as he found out, he got me playing soccer right away. And then I did fencing. So that was my main sport. And I was on the national team for fencing for 12 years. And one of the biggest pieces that whenever I faced adversity, my coach, who was also a person of color, who always said, don't ever give them a reason to not choose you. Don't ever give them a reason to not select you for a team. So I was always kind of in the back of my mind, because I knew that there was something always in a way that they could pick against me, that if they had to choose someone else, maybe they would. So it always made me sort of, in spite of what was happening, I was able to then, look to try and be the best, because I knew that if I wasn't the best, that I wasn't going to get chosen, whether it be because I was, a woman, or whether it was because my family were newcomers, or it was something that I always had to think about. And when I dealt with that, and I had certain coaches later on in life, not my personal coach, but national coaches who maybe walked the line, tiptoed the line on what was acceptable in coaching or what should have been acceptable in coaching, you almost had to just bite the bullet, because they were the ones who were choosing the team. You weren't able to then complain about them or report them, because there wasn't really a mechanism in place. And so you just sort of had to live with it, and in spite of that. And so I'm very lucky that I was still able to, because I know there's a lot of athletes that were not able to, and it really was a barrier for them. And it just shows that when you look at who's participating in the Olympics, the type of people are participating in the Olympics, the socioeconomic status of the people that are participating in the Olympics, it's not necessarily the people who started out. And you have to ask yourself, why aren't they still here? And why didn't they make it? And racism in sport, I think, is definitely a big piece as to why that's happening to some athletes.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk more and touch more on their program. And you're right, that's, I guess, the whole crux of everything. So I'm going to go to Leisha. Starting off, we'll get into your story, Leisha, but barriers. And when you're kind of like the underdog, you have to make sure you practice harder. You are that much more perfect. The stress level is that much higher because you're not like the rest. Correct?
Definitely. And just before I start, thanks so much for having me here and for inviting me to be here. Here on Treaty 1 land, which we're so excited to be on and very thankful to be on. You're right, there's so many barriers to participation. And as you said, that message, and I'm sure each of us here, particularly, coming from immigrant families, had that message growing up for anything we did, that you needed to be better than anybody else. And particularly my parents would say, than white children, you need to be better than them in order for you to excel, and what they can do at a regular level, you need to be able to do 3 times better than them, so that the people don't have a choice but to select you and but to see that you have better skills. So that was not only the message in sport, but also the message in school. And so yeah, you're right. There's tons of barriers, and piggybacking on what Daria said, particularly with athletes of color. And we, there was a post that CBC had put on their social media right before the Olympics started that touted and talked about the number of women and the percentage of women in sport, and particularly in Olympians, and that Canada was sending more women than they were men going to the Olympics. And I made a comment below when it first went out about this is great. It's nice to have more representation in terms of, gender, but, what's the breakdown? What's the race-based data that's in there? And wow, the comments coming back, that's, one thing that you have to know when you're doing any type of anti-racism work on social media. You have to be ready for those comments, because people come back quick and furious with lots of, well, it's not just, like, oh, stop putting race in this conversation. It's, it's who's the best goes. And you have to calmly educate people that it is not always the best that goes. It's not, we're not on a level playing field at all when we're dealing with racism in sport. And, that shows in the Truth and Reconciliation report, particularly for Indigenous athletes, that, there are a lot of gaps when we look at high performance sport and sport development, particularly with Indigenous populations. And so, we have to be a lot more mindful of that. It's not the best that goes. And how do we know who the best is if not everybody has an opportunity to actually access sport and be part of sport?
And in your profession too, Leisha, like kinesiology and recreational management, there are a lot of studies being done, and correct me if I'm wrong, on that very factor, right, of having access for everyone to sport and recreational sport, and how important it is to have physical activity, and how we're really kind of missing the mark. And I don't understand why.
In terms of the amount of research, I don't think I can comment on that as much. Maybe Tina would know a little bit, on some of the anti-racism work she's done. Definitely, Daria, and some of the research work that I've been a part of as well with the anti-racism in sport campaign. There really isn't as much research out there as people think. We don't know the numbers. We haven't really spent the time in research to talk about the experiences of newcomers, the experiences of Indigenous athletes, the experiences of Black athletes, the experiences of Asian athletes, the experiences of East Indian Muslim, athletes. We really haven't done that work yet in research as much as I know. There probably are definitely groups, in different places in the world, probably.
Oops, we just lost you for a bit there, Leisha. maybe I'll get Tina jump in then on giving us an idea on sort of where the data is right now and as far as this subject goes.
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that my knowledge of it is not nearly as extensive as Leisha, but, the sport I know best, or then I've been kind of involved in really thinking about questions of race, is figure skating. And so I've been really trying to engage with the literature. But I think Leisha's entirely right. There's been no expectation of sports organizations that we would gather data on race, ethnicity, indigeneity. So I think even as we see sports organizations trying now to respond, to do their work, the reality is we can't even answer those questions. And, how many are there? And I'm really excited. I'm currently involved in a project with figure skating where we're beginning to start a survey so we can understand better the experiences of athletes, but particularly in the relations to questions of racism, of equity, diversity, inclusion. So we can begin to look at that. And, I suspect what we're going to be seeing is a lot of organizations moving to be able to, whether it's through the registration processes or others, to collect race, ethnicity, indigeneity data, because without that data, we can share the anecdotal stories. And I think a lot of the research either focuses on individual experiences, which is really, really important for us to understand how people work through them. But that kind of larger systems and really linking it to systemic racism, it's a lot of speculation. We have systemic racism, here's barriers, and then here's some individual experiences. And that kind of work to, to link it. And I think that's where, as Daria's talked about the anti-racism in sport project, some of the research that's being done at the university here and across the country, that's beginning to get there. But really, it's not as extensive as you would think, right? It's such an obvious question. And I think in part, as I look at this, and I see Leisha's back on, is because the government funding on sport is almost all, when they talk about inclusion, they're interested in gender. And the idea that that's intersectional has only come to the forefront, and you have to make a case to get that funding. And so one of the things that's, this really kind of interesting unfolding is in the world of sport, and particularly because I'm in the world of figure skating, is that the sport itself, generally young women are overrepresented relative to boys. So we're actually not eligible for a lot of different kinds of funding, even though on the grand scheme of sport participation, you would think you would encourage and so there's all these different ways. But also when you start saying we're interested in race and think about racialized experiences, it's a little more difficult. But for me, the excitement is that as researchers ask the question, as athletes demand that we ask the questions, as communities say, why aren't you actually talking about my experience? And, I know in skating, one of our big issues is that, like many other sports, is that it's a judge sport. So people stay quiet. They try not to ruffle feathers. And so it's not been a space where most people feel like they can share their racial, ethnic, or indigeneity. And so actually the answer often is people only learn after people have left sports, how they identify, who their communities are, and what their family is about. And I think this is we've all recognized this is a framework that doesn't treat people as individuals. It only treats them as athletes or best participants. And that big shift towards how do we treat people and see everyone as a person and create and change sport for that kind of inclusion. I think that's, for me, that's so much the important, like at the center of the anti-racism work is seeing people and creating those spaces. And then, as Leisha said, opening up the conversations. And for many of us who are more established or in our sports, or perhaps like me, willing to speak, to talk a lot about things, to take the pushback from others, because I think it's, youth really also demand us a different setting than what I think many of us participated in, where we kind of, in a kind of assimilationist moment, agreed to just kind of do what we needed to do in the sport and tried to keep it separate from our lives. And I think now I'm really happy to see that that's just, people are held accountable for that. And I think that's a really good move.
Oh, well, I think it's time to break the ceiling in sport. But I want to go with Chris, because I'm going to come back to this conversation because it is so important, and mental health too. I want to get into that. But I want to go with Chris though. I want to share your story. Yourself as an athlete. You do have a personal story on your side, and then we'll get into your son. Go Huskers.
Awesome. Thank you very much. First off, I want to thank you for having me, and also recognizing some of the struggles the Aboriginal community are going through right now. I really appreciate that, and it's also great to be here with such a diverse group of ladies. So it's great. Yeah, myself, I grew up, I think, playing lacrosse and hockey. And I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg in the Lord Soccer community, Lord Soccer developments. And I think I used sports almost as a bit of an escape, to be honest with you. It was my dad's a residential school survivor. And I think I ended up using that as a bit of an escape to get away from some of the struggles at home. And I would go to the local community center and do floor hockey there, ball hockey, anything like that. And I would stay there right till the end, till it closed. And I got involved with lacrosse at the age of 16 through high school, St. John's High School. And back then I was, 5'4", 5'5", 95 to 100 pounds. So I was thin. And I was playing against some very big boys. And everyone used to say, "Wow, look at that guy run. Look at how fast." And they thought I was looking for the glory to score. I was running for my life. These guys were trying to hit me with their sticks, trying to cross-check me. And I was like, my goodness, But it was great, and I really looked forward to it. I enjoyed it. And I fell in love with the game. From there, I was able to travel for Manitoba Junior Men's at that point, and I was able to start traveling to tournaments in Oshawa, all across Canada, across the US. And I was like, wow, a young Aboriginal boy from the inner city being able to do this. And I was really, really happy for it. Stuck with the sport, and I ended up playing for the senior men's Manitoba, so that's 21 and over. And I got to travel even more and experience even more things. And I played with some great people. Ended up playing with the Ojibwe Nationals based out of Saugeen. And as Leisha said earlier, a lot of athletes have a lot of skill, but for some reason they might not be able to make it due to maybe financial circumstances, things like that. And one part that I remember is a teammate of mine, Rolly, a great lacrosse player based out of Saugeen. He had Harvard University come and scout him out from Saugeen, Manitoba, one of the reserves. At 16, they were starting to scout him, and they gave him a full scholarship offer to Harvard when he graduated at 17, and he didn't take it. Part of the thing was because he didn't want to leave his community. For a young Aboriginal man to leave, and he didn't go. And it was just unfortunate, but his opportunity was gone. And I love playing the game. It was great. I think it's had a chance to show me parts of the world, and had a chance to play with some great players. And I loved it a lot.
And did you, during that time, have any issues or faced racism yourself?
Not necessarily when I was playing lacrosse. However, I did play ball hockey at a league here in Manitoba, and I faced it there actually. And this was a high competitive league. At the time when I was playing, I used to have dreadlocks, and my dreadlocks were probably at my waist when I cut them off. And it was really bad. In this one particular league, I had seen it a lot. And when I had voiced concerns about it, the conveners of the league just kind of poo-pooed it. They didn't do anything about it because these guys were involved with their Team Manitoba team and their travel team. And it was almost like an old boys club, if you will. So, you know what, they were doing that. And some of the comments I heard, I remember one evening in particular, my wife was in the stands. They made a derogatory comment towards her for Aboriginal women. And then another one was that they started calling me savage. Why don't you go home and eat your kids? They're saying this as I was lined up against their boards, waiting for the face-off. So I was sitting there and I was hearing this. I couldn't believe I was hearing this. Caught me off guard. They were calling me things like predator because of the dreadlocks, which was okay. That's fine. That's trash talk. Jack Sparrow from, Pirates of the Caribbean, things like that. But when they start making it racial, that was a whole different game. Go eat your kids. Go home savage. The community you come from, you're probably used to fighting with sticks. And it got pretty ugly after that. They had to call the game. And again, I went to the conveners and they said they didn't hear anything. The referee was a good friend of the team and he said, I didn't hear nothing. The only individual that was able to confirm what had been said was the attendant who was working the rink. And he said, I heard it all and I will put it in writing. Came in writing and nothing was done. Nothing was ever done about it. I vowed right there and then I would never play in that league again, and I did leave.
Wow. Now, I guess turning towards your son now,
Yep.
he's quite, I guess, the accomplished football player and heading out west.
Yep.
So I guess we were talking before just a little bit, and you're so proud, like both of you, your wife and you are so proud, but do you have kind of mixed emotions sending him off?
You know, somebody had told me that played for that team, the community that he's going out to has a bit of a racial tone to it. And that concerned me right away. But I like to think that we have raised our son strong enough to be able to deal with that. Unfortunately, I've had to warn him that there may be comments that would be made to him based on his race. And he himself, he has dreadlocks now as well. And I guess he's following in my footsteps. And you know, I've warned him of things like that. And again, that's an unfortunate thing. I asked him last night. I said, "Have you ever heard any racial comments made towards you while you're playing?" He said, "None, never. A lot of trash talk, and that is part of sport, you know, but nothing racial." And I was very happy to hear that. Really happy to hear that. Because I don't think I would want him to go through some of the things that I've heard and some of the feelings that come with it, the anger, because he's not an angry man. He's a big teddy bear, and you know, I wouldn't want him to feel that anger.
Oh, wow. Well, we wish him all the luck, and we're
Thank
gonna,
you.
yes. So I want to go back now, talking to also about mental health, because this is all part and parcel, right, with racism and the pressures and stress. And so Leisha, actually, I'm going to get you to actually share your athletic experience, which is quite the experience. So now that I'm told, but you know, and then kind of touch on, say, you know, the stresses that you went through as an athlete.
Sure. I'm sorry for my technical glitches today. I hope
That's okay.
hope I can stay. If not, I'll be back. If not, I'll be back.
Tina just jumps in anyway, so it's okay.
Perfect. Yeah, so I, you know, I was born here in Winnipeg. I'm a first generation Canadian, as is Daria, as she mentioned. My parents are from Grenada, a little island in the Caribbean, and immigrated to Canada in 1968. So they've been here for a long time. And you know, they got me into sport because I was just very active child, and the sport that I leaned into was baton twirling. And you know, they didn't know anything about baton twirling. You know, it's really interesting when you hear about other you know, people getting into sports, usually something their parents did, or you know, not always, but often. And my parents had never seen a baton, so they had no clue what it was. It was just at the community center, and they thought, I need an hour break from this child. So so that's why, you know, I ended up in baton twirling. And my mom will say as soon as the stick was in my hand, that was it. Like, she knew I just loved the challenge of it. I loved the tricks I could do. I loved, you know, it was very natural for me, and I really enjoyed it. So so I grew up in the sport. You know, I stayed as a competitive athlete for 18 years and had a chance to represent Canada at 7 different world championships and a couple of world medals. And, you know, when you're, you know, and I have a hard time, I think sometimes, you know, not talking about my own experience, but equating it to other Olympians, because we're not an Olympic sport. We have got a world championship. We're a very small sport. You know, when you go to Europe, it's a little bit bigger. That's when we, you know, actually have, I would say, crowds that come for finals and for to watch the competition. And that's always, I find the biggest distraction is probably because we're used to not having a ton of people in the stands. So, you know, so for me, you know, I think, yeah, I probably had, you know, my own struggles sometimes with competing, definitely from transitioning from the junior division to the senior division. I was very successful as a junior, and making that leap to senior was really difficult for me, and I thought it would be easy. It was a little easier in the first year, and then as time went on, I realized that, oh my gosh, people are getting better. People are actually getting better. Why doesn't everyone just stay bad? You know what I mean? But people are getting better, and people I always beat before easily were beating me, and that played with my mind a lot. I lost a lot of confidence, I feel like, for a couple years in there, and so much so that I wanted to just quit the sport. But the year I had decided to quit, my coach, in her wisdom, said, why don't you just do one more year for yourself? And I hadn't really thought about that way. I was always worried about who I was competing against, and worried about the medals, and worried about the outcome, and not enough about the process. So I'm glad I had a coach that had that wisdom, and that year that I did it for myself was the year that I made national team again. It's so important to really focus on the process and just focus on the enjoyment and love. So I think, when Simone Biles is talking, this week about not enjoying it, that you have to enjoy it and you have to find the joy. That is so much about sport. If you aren't enjoying it, it is not fun, and you can't perform. You really can't. And so, I think in her particular situation, a lot of people have lost the joy. I mean, Penny Oleksiak's another one. We just celebrated her yesterday as, one of the greatest Olympians, of all time, really, in winning swimming. But she took most of 2018 off because of mental health, and missed a big competition because she just stopped swimming for a few months. And when she did re-enter, she didn't re-enter at the national level. She re-entered at a club in Toronto, just trying to sort of find her place again. And what is that love? And what is that? So, she was fortunate that, these missteps, and not missteps, but, things in terms of mental health came up for her at times where she was off, and it was, in the middle of Olympic cycle. So nobody really cares, right, that much. We just see that she's back and she's doing great. But, she had to go through those dark times. And, and for Simone right now, the dark times are now for her. So, and we don't know. We don't know when those things are going to happen. And we just have to make sure that we have set up a structure and a system where we are empathetic, where we can have space for athletes to make those decisions, and that the coaches and supporters around them have the information they need, and are able to identify that and help that athlete through whatever decisions that they're making at that competition. It is, as Dr. Adrienne Leslie Toogood would say, it's humans first, athletes second. And we have to really think about what that looks like now. Simone and Naomi Osaka, they've now showed us what it looks like to prioritize your mental health in sport, actually doing the sport, and what that looks like, not behind the scenes working with a sports psych person or talking to your support staff, but what does that look like in the moment? And they're showing us what that looks like in the moment, and they're showing the courage that's needed to do that.
Yes, I know. That's such a great example of how sport itself is changing. Tina, to talk about that mental health, and you had sent me a link to this great figure skating video, which is really taking big steps, and athletes talking about their lived experience, which I just think is so important as a great example what Leisha is saying.
Yeah, I would say, in the skating community, I mean, in terms of mental health, finally conversations are coming forward, as well as various aspects of physical health that people have ignored. So particularly eating disorders, the need for body positive guidelines, all of these things were finally starting to open conversations, and finally starting to open conversations on race. And, I'm very privileged to be able to call Caitlin Weaver a friend of mine. She's a former Olympic ice dancer, but this production that she did for Open Ice Visionaries that featured the stories of athletes who are really thinking about the relationship between sport and social justice and change. It was so powerful, thinking through the way that our experiences become intertwined with our very sense of self. And, I would recommend it to anybody to watch this, but really the takeaway was, you need, being able to be true to yourself in sport and out of sport, and knowing that is enough, and having the supports around you to ensure that that's there. And I think it's, whether it's Adam Rippon's story or Kara Corpy and Alaj Balde, Scott Hamilton, all featured in here, and as they kind of their different struggles to be who they are and through sport, but also how many barriers, how sport created barriers and insisted these kind of big moments in their career and the trauma that came with it. And I think that's one of the things, that I'm so happy, Simone Biles, Naomi Osaka, that they're taking that they're speaking out. And just before we came on today, I was actually on a Zoom session with my figure skate with some of the skaters that I work with. And we often are checking in on different things. And today we spent our time, actually, I said to them, how many have followed the coverage of Simone Biles? Let's talk about this. And, it was such a great opportunity because it allowed us to talk about how we prioritize mental health, what the risks are. Are you preparing for that? And one of the things that we talked about that I hadn't thought about really until I had an opportunity to listen to my skaters. So, as always, listen to the youth, they can tell you things. But as I listened to them, I said, the thing is that when anyone enters into a competition setting in any, or, even practice, if they have a physical injury, there's always a plan in place. You know how much they can withstand the pain, what you should do, and when you need to withdraw. And I said, mental health has to have the same one. So that's not just, that where you're at and where is the point that you need to withdraw where it's no longer safe for you. And, I was so, just so thankful to my skaters to be open and sharing with me. And, as I've been thinking about it too, just thinking as well, and I see Leisha's camera went, but I wish Lisa's camera was back on when she comes back, because I think one of the places that this is, although in sports beginning to open up more, is that I'm not sure there are enough qualified people to consider the intersection of mental health and race, so that racialized athletes, the pressures, the way that they're put in the spotlight, what's expected of them, are not the same. And so that when we also want to think about mental health, it's not the same for everybody. And, as I think about our strategies for anti-racism, really recognizing that in many sports, the kinds of demands around what I just think of as assimilation, fit yourself in and you can be fine in our sport, are there, or the types of barriers, the lack of representation, the lack of mentorship, the constant need to, and the message be better so that no one can find a reason not to like you. And so, I think this is where we really, as we talk about mental health, also need to think about, well, who are we training? Who is going to be working with athletes so that they understand racialized experiences as well, and that we're not assuming. I'm glad you're back, Leisha. I was like, Leisha will be able to follow up this comment, because I think it's really important that we see the networks, the ability to talk about it, but race is part of the experience of mental health, and also whose families and communities are receptive to hearing those. And I think that's, certainly in the Asian community, space to talk comfortably about mental health is not as open as we often want. And we know that from talking on Hugh in other ways.
We certainly do.
And I think too, it's just when we're thinking about who the people, who the athletes or who they're speaking to, they want to speak to someone that looks like them as well. That's how we also become, so, in the clinical psych world, there also needs to be a push to think about how we're diversifying people within clinical psych, so that, we can have people who look like the people who need the services. That's so important as well. That representation is so important.
Yeah. Daria, I do have a question from our audience watching. So it might be twofold with Tina too. So they just want basic one, will research results from the anti-racism and sport campaign or the figure skating research results be available online so people can see this once it's finished? Daria?
Yes, so we're doing sort of 3 different research projects within our research piece. Is the first 2 are environmental scan and a literature review of what's going on with the current state of the research that's out there. And then we're also doing focus groups with people with lived experience. And so once all of that's complete and we're able to compile that data, we're then going to be sharing that through our campaign. And then that information is also going to be incorporated into our training materials and our presentations. So short answer, I guess, yes, but long answer is there.
And that's so perfect too, because it was touched upon the coaches. The coaches are so important, right, into creating this safe and inclusive space for all athletes, and to encourage them. I just have another question, and Chris and Daria and Tina and Leisha too. It's actually a great question. So Chris, they're saying as a parent, when you overhear racial comments towards your children playing sports, what can you do when they love to play, but you want to protect them?
Yeah, that is a good question. I haven't had to face that yet, but I think if I do, I would try to sit down and talk to my son, or in this case, any child, and let them know that there are some people still who have certain views of other cultures and other races, not to let them win and knock you down. Use that as a motivator and to keep going forward and not stop. Definitely use that as a motivator. And that's what I had done personally when I was younger. I had to use that as a motivator to keep on going. And if I had a chance, I would maybe calmly try and talk to the individual who was making that comment to let them know that that sort of thing is wrong. The type of pressure and things they're saying to a young person, a young athlete, or maybe even directed at a referee or anything like that, because I know refs get a lot of a hard time as well. Not called for, especially in this day and age. A lot of people are opening their eyes and the world is changing for the better. And definitely would try to have that conversation very calmly.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's always interesting in the heat of the moment. Daria, is there anything that in the campaign that deals with that, with the parents?
Yes, even with students. So with our school presentations, we talk about what to do if you see or you experience it, and who can you go to within your school sports system. That's really important. And we also ask schools to identify the person that they can go to, because it's not always something that you talk about on your first day. If you experience this, this is where you go to. So we really want to be intentional about them using that information and sharing it with their students. And then also for the parents in our training, we're also going to be talking about that is what resources can you use to then escalate this? How can you, with an organization as a board member, what is your responsibility? And then how can you best implement the right policies and procedures and act upon them to change the system? And so we're really looking at that sort of like a holistic, like multifaceted approach when we're looking at how do you address it from different areas. If you're a coach, what do you do if you hear it on your own bench? What do you hear it if it's from another player? How are you going to address that, and the importance of it and the way to do it, but then also to understand that there's it's an emotional toll on that person. So we want to make sure that there's support systems in place and that they're aware of them. And that's one of the big things is people don't talk about it enough. People don't understand that it's important that we need to address it. We need to find solutions for it. And we need to be very intentional about how we do it. We don't want to just have it have the happenstance way that it comes up and we're reacting to a problem. Mm-hmm. It has to be out there. We have to talk about it and we have to find a solution before it happens.
Right. And then maybe, again, Daria and Chris and Tina and Leisha, I guess all of you then. Okay, so in the Indigenous culture, elders are so important, knowledge keepers, sharing their stories, their advice, their lived experience. Is this something that we can use in this anti-racism campaign? Of course, there's elders in every culture. Am I not wrong? Tina?
Well, that's, I think, such, an important and powerful moment. And I feel for me, all sports, but particularly the sport of figure skating, is so early in the journey of really thinking in serious ways about Indigenous engagement, what it actually means to decolonize the sport, not just to work in an anti-racist mode. And to acknowledge, that our sport is only possible on stolen lands, and that it's on, the dispossession of Indigenous people that we can practice sport. Because of that we can practice sport. And so that's a long journey. And I think, particularly in the skating community, we're just beginning to have conversations actually about how then should we be engaging with elders as part of this recognition. And also, we're beginning another pilot project that will unfold this year that I'm really excited about, that really is asking to work with members of Indigenous communities to find out for them what would make skating meaningful. What would make skating be community? Not how do we ask them to participate in the programs we already have, but what actually would need to happen in skating? How would it need to change? And so I think we really need to shift and think about some of these and give up some of our power and position and privilege about what we think the sport is and why we think it's important and what the values are, and ask others. And I think this is true for those who are Indigenous, elders, prospective elders. You know, Daria's already talked about the Aboriginal coaching modules. All of these that people thought were extras to their training are actually fundamental to our training. And I think that's the key, is that they no longer should be something that we do if we have extra time or we think we're going to work with particular individuals. But I think we just have to recognize that if we are coaching and we're part of any sport organization, you know, those from Indigenous communities will and should be participating, and we need to do that work from the outset. And I think for me, that's the really kind of, you know, powerful part of thinking, because I think, you know, there are elders in all communities. There's people who bring knowledge from different ways, but where we're located, we have to particularly think about, you know, knowledge, Indigenous knowledge in that. But while I have the mic open, before others go over, I will say, yes, the research from the figure skating study will be available. The survey and the final reports probably won't come out till January of 2022, but it will be on the Skate Canada website, because I've been, you know, I'm very fortunate that they've agreed to partner. They will be looking at the recommendations, and the hope is that we will also be presenting it in various town halls. And Tracy's always a great supporter of this, so perhaps you'll be able to hear it back here at some point, and maybe even with some of the work out of the research from the Anti-Racism in Sport, because I think there's a lot of shared conversations. And
Yes.
but the goal is that this should be what we're all talking about, that we're sharing it as openly and broadly as possible, so we can understand, you know, the shared issues and those that are particular to different sports.
Well, thank you. That was my next thing. That we will do a show on both of those, because definitely want to hear Daria and Tina, and then, you know, maybe Chris, then we can have your son on too, and he can kind of give us his experience there as a Husker. And Leisha, I want to see some baton twirling, girl. But getting back to elders, and you know what, Tina, you always put it so eloquently, and it always makes such an impact, because yes, figure skating is very white, no doubt. But so Daria, too, with this campaign, are you incorporating, you know, some of these Indigenous ways too?
Yeah, so part of what we're looking to do with our training is to really focus in on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, specifically 89 and 90. And this is where we're going to be looking at addressing the barriers, the policies, the programs, and initiatives for physical activity, and that they're inclusive of Indigenous peoples. And that's what's really important about this, is that we're not really, we're always looking to how can we enhance the training, and what partners should we be engaging. So our one of our partners is Manitoba Aboriginal Sport and Recreation Council. So when we talk about incorporating the ACM, the Aboriginal coaching module, into the training, it's not that we're going to be delivering that training, it's that we're engaging Manitoba Aboriginal Sport and Recreation to deliver that training as the experts in the field from there. And I think that's really important, is that when we're looking to engage in Indigenous people within the campaign, is that it's not just us telling them how things should be, but it's them telling us, you know, what needs to be incorporated, and then involving them in that process. And that's really what we're looking towards, is really engaging people, having them offer and share their knowledge, and taking that in, really understanding, really intentionally doing that. And I think intentionality is a big piece of our campaign and the partners that we choose to involve as well.
Oh, well, that's great. Well, we can hardly wait to see the fruition of this campaign. I mean, it's so badly needed. And Leisha, too, I guess it's really, like you said, athletes want to see people like them, right? They'll put their trust in seeing people like them. And I think that is just so, so important. And for you, in kinesiology, in rec management, but more, you know, seeing all of these between high performance athletes and just rec, what is it about this faculty that drew you in, and why are you so passionate?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, I have always loved sport. I mean, I grew up in a family that that we watched sport a lot, and we used to, I'm going to age myself, but video record sport a lot, you know, and rewatch it and rewind and watch again. And I think, you know, not just through my experience, but I think, you know, through my family's experience, my dad was always really into cricket. I remember on Sundays, coming home from church, having breakfast, and my dad was in his all whites and gone for the day, like to Assiniboine Park where they still play cricket on Sundays and many different times during the week. And so I think that's always been ingrained in me. And I'm really fortunate that I had coaches who talked a lot about, at the time, even revolutionaries talking about sports psychology, when I was 13 and 12 and talking about the importance of imagery and talking about the importance of self-talk, and not knowing all the research around it, but had done, some of their own research and, had figured out some things that I could do to get myself to the next level. And so that sports psych piece has always been very, I think, just a part of me. And so I was a physical educator for a few years, and then, went back to school after that. And I think finding out that I could actually do a master's and PhD in sports psychology was very exciting for me. And so, I've always felt connected to our faculty. I'm a graduate of our faculty as well. And so I think I've just always felt that connection to kinesiology, to movement, and not just only to sport, but also just, being active, movement, dance, and music, and how that all comes together. And so I think that movement piece is really important. I don't want to always just focus on high performance athletes, rec athletes. It's really not about that in the end. It really is about just trying to get people more active, trying to make a space that sport can be meaningful, and for young people. For my own research, I do most of my research in youth development through sport. So how can we make sport meaningful at those ages, and so that, while they're growing up and moving, that they can feel what I felt, I guess, is what I want them to feel, no matter what your background is, that we all can feel that connection. And Chris put it so beautifully, you can see his face light up just when you think about, lacrosse and what it meant to you growing up. And, we all, I think a lot of people feel that. And now it's about how can we make that even better? How can we make those environments even better? What are the responsibility of coaches, of refs, for us to make athletes have a better experience through sport? And how can we make that as inclusive and inviting and welcoming as possible?
Yes, and that is the daunting task. Chris, I was going to ask you, I mean, the youth today are much different, and of course, with your son, but you spoke, like you said, very passionately about what lacrosse meant to you. What would you say to future young athletes out there? Maybe someone that is kind of scared to start, or where to start in sport.
Yeah, you know what? All I would say is that don't throw in a towel right away. Make sure you give it an honest chance, and to do your best. And you're going to have some people that are going to try and knock you down and tell you can't do this or you can't do that. Maybe you're not the fastest or the biggest, but use that as a motivator. And keep going. And you're going to find some of your best memories as a young person is when you're playing on a team and playing sports. And the camaraderie that you find, whether it be traveling on a bus an hour away, even after defeat, that bus ride feels pretty bad, but you know what? You're with your comrades, your brothers or sisters that you go to war with, and those are things that you'll remember as an adult. I'm 47 now. I still remember all my road trips and things like that with my teammates, and I still look back at it very, very fondly. And I still sit here and I bore my kids and tell them about my stories, and they roll their eyes like, "Oh, Dad, that was in the 90s. That was so long ago." Yeah, I guess it does seem like a lifetime ago, but I still look back and I just think it's just great.
And what do you hope for your son?
I hope that he has a injury-free career. I'm always worried about the injuries. But you know what? I hope he has the same memories that I have when he goes away. And like I said, when he got picked up by this team, National Signing Day on July 1st, he already had tweets from the veterans on the team welcoming him. And I don't think he found that or had that during his high school career. And I could see that he felt really accepted. He felt, really welcomed, and they're all races on the team. Asian, Black, Native, Caucasian, everything. And there was a real bond there already right off the bat. And as a parent, so proud.
Aw.
Felt really good. So I'm looking forward to it, and I look forward to watching his games.
Yes. Oh, no doubt. Big proud
Absolutely.
parent. Oh, that's awesome, Chris. Daria, for yourself, I mean, you've been on the competitive professional stage competing. You know, I know tonight we've been all talking about racism and mental health issues, but when it comes right down to it, when you do that win, when fencing you score that winning point, nothing else matters, right? Whatever color you are, gender you are, male or female, whatever. Am I correct?
You're correct. Your gold medal is the same color as on you as it is on someone else. And I think that's the thing, is that no one can take that feeling away from you, regardless of what you're going through. I think it just means so much more when you do things in spite of what happened and what's been going on in your life. I think it's just a bigger accomplishment, and it's something that you'll keep forever. And I hope that through the campaign, we can have more athletes have that experience and really, really enjoy sport. And I think that's the goal for everyone, is that everyone can participate and everyone can have that feeling.
Oh, well, we look so forward to more of your campaign. And Tina, I mean, you've said it all, but even outside of the world of figure skaters, you know, we know that we have a lot of work to do, whether it's reconciliation or Black Lives Matter or all of these things that have come into our lives. But do you think perhaps the pandemic, where the world stopped, everything stopped, we no longer were totally thinking of ourselves, we were actually thinking about the world itself, of a global population, that this maybe put a stop in time for everything that was moving so fast forward in the world of sport, in competition. You know, thinking, oh, look at the billions of dollars that Tokyo spent for these Olympics, that and still, I know even now they're still going on, and we're kind of like, ooh. But do you think that was a moment of reflection?
I certainly think, everyone in here has been involved in sports, so they have their own internal frameworks that just never stop. Each training session, season moves into the next one. If you're involved in an organization, either as a volunteer on a board, you're a coach, you're planning events, and it's just one after another. And I think that the pandemic really stopped. It gave people time. The disproportionate impacts of COVID on certain populations became very apparent as we looked at all of this. And obviously Black Lives Matter, learning and having to see the evidence of the impact of residential schools. All of this came at a point where people had time, and I think to start the education that Daria's already talked about. And, so when I look at sport now, my hope is, like many, that people can enjoy themselves in sport, but also I think many people will stop to think about both what made sport special for them, and also where were the limits in their participation to who they could be. And, I see this, Pride Month, we saw more athletes coming out publicly who said, I've been reflecting and I've realized that, sport denied this part of me and I want to share it now. And I've had the time to do that. And I think we're seeing more who are taking their positions and speaking about their racialized experiences. And this is really important. And, so my hope is that sport takes that, and sport both provides that space for joy and fulfillment that all of us have talked about, that we, have experienced, that we see our children experience, but that it also becomes a space where there is social injustice. We can speak out, we can be protected in speaking out, that athletes can speak out safely, and that, and that we actually all feel responsible for doing that. We no longer sort of accept it as somehow a special bracketed system that we have to support, but actually we just recognize that it's very reflective of all the inequities in society, and that we're going to do that work. And so my hope is that sport just kind of finally says, we're not separate from society, we're part of it, so let's get to work. Because that enjoyment will only increase once we're able to all do that. And it'll be more accessible, it'll be more inclusive, and it will be a better place.
And we'll be all healthier, right, Leisha? It just all goes hand in hand, right? No more junk food, no more sitting in front of a Zoom call. Get active.
I don't about the no more junk food part.
Yeah, I'm all for the junk food. Don't take away my junk food, Tracy.
Okay. We won't yet. Oh, but you get the last comment here, Leisha. taking a look at, you are now a teacher, a mentor, you know, giving out information. It's not more, I don't think it's any more, we'll always have textbooks and have to study from them, but I think it is truly, it's the conversations you have, it's the lived experience that you share, I think is going to be more important to university students moving on, correct?
Absolutely. You know, and I think, you know, if we're going to be understanding more about, you know, Indigenous research paradigms, we know that storytelling is such a big part of the way of life of Indigenous peoples. And you know, I think my parents would also say they did a lot of storytelling, and we learn so much through stories, whether they're, you know, stories of challenges or if they're successes. And I think it's important that we have to share both. And I'm going to, you know, take some time to encourage Chris, now that his son's going away, to start coaching in lacrosse. I mean, you know, your passion and joy, that's exactly what we need from coaches. You know, we need coaches who care. We need coaches who understand the assignment, who understand, you know, what kids need, and understand, you know, the impact that they can make also on parents. You know, coaches, I mean, parents listen to coaches for the most part, you know, or coaches have a little bit of power where they can, you know, try to think about what environment do they want to cultivate in their sport. And so I'm really hoping that all coaches, all parents are really working together now. You know, it's not just one or the other, but we really have to think about that. And as we mentor the next generation, you know, those in our faculty and going out and whatever profession they're planning on going into, we do want to make sure that they are equipped with what they need, understanding their assignment, understanding their position, understanding the privilege and the powers that they have, and how they can use that to make sport better.
Oh, well, quickly before we wrap up, Daria, where can people go for more information on the anti-racism campaign?
We have a website, antiracisminsport.ca, and then we also are on social media, on Twitter, on Instagram, and on Facebook.
Okay, everyone be sure to follow. I want to thank all of you tonight. It has been such a great conversation. And yes, Daria and Tina, I will be in touch, because we want to know these results, and the only way to really know them, right, is to get it out there. I think people only vested maybe in a sport or maybe interested will go to that, but I think this is knowledge for everybody if we want to make sport accessible to all. And especially you, Chris, thank you so much. And yeah, can hardly wait to see your son on the field. And thank you again, Leisha. It was so great to have you. Tina, as always, amazing. And Daria, congratulations on this wonderful campaign and Immigration Partnership Winnipeg. So have a great summer. And I'm so, so thankful that we could all get together and spend this time together. Thank you, everyone. And that concludes Healing Hearts. We'll see you in a couple of weeks.